now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Thank you very much, Becky, and welcome everyone to a very special edition of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. This time, a friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, Jeff Sammut, who is a radio show host on XM, Sirius XM. He also has a podcast called Remembering with Jeff Sammut, where he looks back on events and individuals who have left us and reminisces about those people or those events. He asked me, as well as a good friend, Bret Gallagher, to join him in remembering the great John Candy. This is the way that went.
So how did you both come to know John Candy? Ted, let's start with you.
I met John through a mutual friend who met him on a flight from Los Angeles. This is my friend Orstal, who was working for, I don't know if it was Viacom at the time, television, one of the television companies. And he met him on a flight, and I was working at, God, where was I? I don't know. I was at CKFM or wherever I was, Q, I don't remember. And so he introduced me to John, and that's when I first got to, and then I just got to know him. And John's such an affable guy that once you got to know him, if he liked you at the beginning, unless you did something stupid, there's no reason why he wouldn't continue to like you. Am I right, Brett?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. If he liked you, if you crossed him or did something stupid, he used to always say, "That guy's headed to the gallows, never to be seen from or heard from again."
Yeah.
If he liked you, you're friend for life.
Yeah.
Brett, what about you? How did you come to know John Candy? How did you enter his purview?
So how I entered his purview was I worked for a company called Inside Productions. That's how I met Ted. We'll get back to that in a minute. But when Candy Gretzky and all bought the Argos, I was at Insight. And one of Gretzky's buddies, Brian Cooper, who Ted knows, they called him. They didn't know anybody in Toronto. They bought the Argos. Bruce bought them in LA from Harry Ornest, who lived in St. Louis and LA. He bought the Argos in LA. Didn't know they got Wayne. So then they called Cooper and said, "We need you to run the Argos." So I bumped into Cooper on King Street. He said, "Hey, you want to come with me and we're going to run the Argos?" I said, "No." But John Candy, Bruce Mel, Wayne Gretzky. I said, "Yeah, that's interesting." So Coop said, "Okay, come with me." Up to the Four Seasons where they were meeting. I met John, went into the bar at the Four Seasons, and that was it.
Wow. And I wanted to ask, you go into a bar, meet up with John Candy. What was it like to go out with John Candy, to go to a bar, to go to a restaurant? What was that like?
The thing with John is that John took his role as co-owner of the Argos very seriously. His role was going to be the co-owner, also cheerleader for not only for the Argos but for the CFL. But going out with John, anywhere with John was, John was a rock star. He was Bono, Mick Jagger, Justin Bieber. He was that right then, what they are now. And because John was John, he couldn't hide. Gretzky would put the glasses on and the hat, and he would just motor through. Not Candy. No way. So to go out with John, as Ted knows, anywhere, Toronto was crazy. Everywhere was crazy. But no, it was a mob scene. It was a whole orchestrated, movement of that. But it wasn't like it is now. You watch that David Beckham doc, right? And you see Beckham by himself in mobs, because no security, none of that. Like that with John. People always say to me, "Are you his bodyguard?" No, but I guess I have to be.
If I could just jump in,
yeah.
Jeff, I recall one time having lunch with John, and we were sitting about halfway into the restaurant, maybe a couple hundred seat restaurant, and it took us, I think, 45 minutes to get out of the restaurant because he couldn't. Every table that he walked by, somebody would be tugging on his arm and go, "Oh, Mr. Candy, oh John, oh John." I mean, whether it be a little kid or somebody twice his age, and it was just like, we just want to shake your hand, just want to love your stuff, and good luck Argos, if it was the Argos at the time, I don't remember, but wanted to shake his hand and get an autograph, and I'm thinking, if it had been today, it would have taken twice as long because everybody would have had a selfie with him.
Yeah.
He would
Yeah.
not turn anybody down. Except I'll tell you one funny story. Years ago, I was one of the writers in the NHL awards, and John was a presenter. And we were at the Hilton Hotel here in Toronto, and we're walking back from the banquet hall into the main hotel. And my brother was with me. He was a couple of years older than I. And he says, and he's holding a program, the NHL Awards program. And he said, "John, would you do me a favor? Could you just sign my program?" And John looked at him. He said, "No." And I went, "What?" And my brother said, "How come?" He said, "Steve," he says, "you're like my age." He said, I'm not giving you my autograph. What, are you kidding me?" He says, "No, I wanted you to sign it for I have two daughters." "For your daughters, yeah, no problem." But he wouldn't sign it for my brother. Right? Because it was like, what are you talking about? I'm you. I'm one of you, right?
Well, and
Ted, you're absolutely right.
And as much as people would have wanted John Candy's attention, when he went in there, he's such an affable person. Did he talk to like everybody that worked at a restaurant, everybody that worked at a bar? Was he like that?
Yeah, John. When I first started hanging with John would say, I learned a lot of stuff from John back then that I've applied. I just didn't get to work in LA because of my affable manner and my good looks. I actually had to learn something. So John would say to me, "Look, we're going to get along great, but we treat the doorman the exact same as we treat the CEO or the owner of the place. Okay, that's what we do. Me and you, that's what we do." So with John, he would then we also had a bit of a code too. John would say, "I'm always the good guy. You're going to be the bad guy sometimes." So John would do this, talk, and I'd have to kind of grab him to move him along. And he'd go, "It ain't me, it's that guy."
Yeah.
Yes. So he would talk to everybody. Stories, everybody had a story. John would engage with everybody. Doesn't matter what level they are at, with everybody.
Yeah. Well, Wayne Gretzky used to have it started off as a charitable tennis tournament out in Bradford, his hometown, and then it turned into a softball tournament. And CTV was taping it, and I was hired as one of the people to do some interviews with some of the celebrities who were there. And John was there. He wasn't playing, but he was a celebrity. And I was positioned by home plate. It was before the game, and I see John has just entered the stadium from the back of the stadium. He's up by the left field wall, and he's walking up toward home plate, so eventually getting to the third baseline. And it took him probably 6 to 8 minutes to walk that area. Now, this isn't Sky Dome or Rogers Center or Yankee Stadium. This is a softball diamond, okay? It should take you 40 seconds. But he couldn't, even though people weren't allowed on the field, just everybody just reaching over it. Just by the time he finally got to me to do the interview, like I'm standing there and I'm waiting going, oh my God. But that was him. But he needed somebody like Bret to say that, because otherwise he would have never got anything done.
Yeah. Well, and Ted, you'd mentioned to me before that in being part owner of the Argos, one thing that that John would do was he would fly to whatever city the Argos were playing in.
Bret
he would
can
fly
answer that better than I.
Yeah,
he was on those flights with them.
Yeah, and
I was.
And Bret, like, he would go with you a couple of days before a game just so that he can pump up the game, right?
Yeah, we'd go into. John would call it the rubber chicken circuit, right? We would go in a couple of days before a game, and to hype up the game. And this is what part of his commitment. So we'd line up, morning radio. And back then, all the markets had 10 stations. And we would hit every one. And we get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we go 20 minutes, 20 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. Every local radio station in that city, Calgary, Edmonton, didn't matter where it was, Vancouver. And then at night, John would say, let's find the hottest spot, biggest restaurant. Let's go and cause some chaos. And we did. And it was all part of, John would say too, buy your tickets, buy your tickets, buy your tickets. He was selling.
I remember
Then the
reading
next day-
somewhere, Brett. I remember reading, and you can tell me if this is true or not. But times when he was on location shooting a film, if he was somewhere in the middle of Butte, Montana, or whatever, and the Argos were playing a couple of days later, that he would charter a flight and pay for it himself to fly out to Regina or to Calgary, whatever, to promote the game.
He would, yeah. He paid for all that himself, and he really took that role of promoting the Argos and promoting the CFL very seriously. It was what he wanted to do. It's what he because don't forget, since he was a kid, sneaking into Argo games at CME. That's it. He's been an Argo fan since he was a kid. That's so to imagine that being that successful from Toronto, playing football in high school, and then one day owning the team that you have loved since you were like 10 years old. He's very, very
incredible.
proud.
And you mentioned him playing high school football. A knee injury prevented him from continuing, right?
Yeah, I think he played at Neil McNeil, which was his high school. And then he got like most kids that age. They overdevelop before their knees develop, and the lucky ones move forward, but the unlucky ones like John and me, and you, had pull our knees out at a young age, and there goes the career.
Yeah,
That's it.
And he was to go into journalism for school, but he began acting in college. Ted,
I don't know. I'm not sure about that, to be honest with you. I don't know how he actually began his career.
And Brett, do you know was he supposed to be in journalism? Was that his plan before getting into acting?
John's a very creative guy. That part I don't know either. I know it's funny with John. John when you think that he's always been John Candy, then you start going back. Yeah, he always was John Candy. He was always an actor from a very, 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 very early age. But he's also, one thing about John too. That's why directors love John. The directors, Christopher Columbus, all the directors he's worked with, because he was such a creative guy that a career trajectory of journalism to acting or writing creatively doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Now, what do you think was at the root of his ability to make people laugh? Ted, what do you think it was?
He was vulnerable.
Mm.
He was self-deprecating. He was cute as a button in the eyes of women. And he was a big, big teddy bear. And he was just an enormous talent. He was a great dramatic actor as well.
Yes.
I think you saw that in Oliver Stone's film. Was it JFK?
JFK. Yeah.
Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
I think he could have had a God knows what kind of career he could have had had he not left us at such a young age. But I don't think there's anything that he couldn't have done.
Yeah.
No, it's great. You're bang on. You look at his performances. I'm no critic, I'm a fan and friend. In retrospect now, if Planes, Trains was released in this current age, his performance, no doubt, would have gotten an Academy Award nomination. That performance alone, amongst many others, that performance, watch him, and it's retweeted now, and with Ryan Reynolds always referencing it. But I think too, his career, you look at, I remember we talked to Oliver Stone, who directed and co-cast John in JFK with Costner. We were them in Toronto once, and Costner said that he thinks Candy would have had a Charles Laughton trajectory. Laughton was a comic actor. Laughton was a slapstick actor, comedian. Then all of a sudden, Laughton, as he developed and matured, became a huge dramatic actor. And I think, my personal opinion, only because I got the idea planted in me from Oliver Stone, that could have been John's trajectory.
Yeah. Well,
he's an actor.
Even in his comedic roles, I mean, even thinking about like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, of course, but thinking of Uncle Buck, there were so many of his roles that were, I mean, funny. They were hilarious, but they all had so much heart. You were with him, and I think you have to be on board with someone that is performing comedy. But he did that and then some. You felt for his character.
There's a scene in Uncle Buck where he's called in to see his niece's teacher, and I believe it's his niece's teacher, and she's got this like wart on her face or whatever. It ends up funny at the end, right? But she's chastising, saying that she doesn't have any drive, etc., etc., etc. And he goes into this thing and defending his niece, saying, he says, "I don't want to see a world where a kid grows up that doesn't want to fantasize, doesn't want to play, and doesn't want to pretend that things are different, you know." And then he gets up and he throws a quarter on the table. He says, "Next time you're downtown, go buy a rat and have him chew that thing off your face." Or words to that effect. But leading up to it, it was so poignant. Like he you could see him talking from his heart, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, what, this is a kid, man. Where were you at?
Yeah.
Yeah, just watch the last scene of Planes, Trains, right? When he goes home with Steve Martin.
Yeah.
That doesn't melt you. You got no
Yeah.
heart. You touched on earlier, Ted, John. He vulnerable. John's a very vulnerable guy. Shy. Believe it or not, John's pretty shy.
Yeah.
Right? He would come out, but when we were together quiet, he was like, like he would have to unwind it.
Well, he was said to have suffered from severe anxiety and panic attacks. Would you two have known any of that or heard that?
You hear a lot of things. I heard a lot of things, read a lot of things, that I don't know. I don't know if I never saw any of that, but he lived a big life. And the thing with John, Ted knows this, is I used to always say to John too, if you had a problem, that became John's problem. Come here. What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
I will solve that. I'll fix it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And do that 30 times a day with people. It's going to weigh on you.
Yeah.
When I first got to know him, I was working at this point. I was working at CBC Television. CBLT was called then back then, the local affiliate. And I went to the program director, Yvonne Fatan, and I pitched him an idea if I wanted to do a late night talk show. And he said, "Okay, shoot a pilot." So I thought, "Okay, we'll shoot a pilot. Who am I going to get?" And I just met John, and I said to him, I said, "John, would you do me a favor? I want to get this talk show thing, and I need to do a pilot, and it would really help me if I could interview you for like 8-10 minutes or something." "Yeah, no problem, Ted." So we agreed. A couple of days later, he comes. He shows up a few minutes late to the CBC studios. And he said, "Sorry, I'm late." He said, "I had to stop off to buy a sports jacket. I forgot to bring a sports jacket." Honest to God. I'm thinking, like, dude, what the hell are you doing this for me for? And I just began to know him.
Yeah.
Just begun to know him.
Yeah.
Just begun to learn to speak English. You know what I'm saying? I just met him. I mean, he didn't owe me anything. He didn't.
No.
He was not going to benefit from this in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
If you're a friend of his, he knew down here you'd be loyal to him, wouldn't betray him, wouldn't screw him over. So then I'll do anything for you. Ted, you're proof of that. Like there's no doubt about it. That he so he'll do you those services.
And you meet a lot of people over the years. And just as a side note, I did get the show. The pilot did fly for a year or whatever.
Yeah.
Years later, he said to me, "By the way, Ted," he says, "Eugene and I are doing an HBO special on the Schmengi brothers. I got a role for you." And I thought, yeah, people say that in showbiz. "I got something for you." Yeah. 2 weeks later, I get this phone call from one of the producers saying, "This is when the shoot is. This is where the shoot is." And actually, it turned out it was at CFRB where I ended up working.
Yeah.
Like 15, 20 years later. I'd never been there before. We shot it in one little studio. I played a disc jockey, Ted Wellington, interviewing Yosh and Stan. I could never remember which one was Yosh or Stan.
Yeah.
And it was only maybe a 4-minute segment, the whole thing. It took probably 2 hours to shoot because everything in the film industry is so you got to shoot it from 38 different angles. The volume is too soft, the volume is too hard, the lighting is too bright, the lighting is too dull. Try it from this way. And so it's like cut, stop, and roll, stop. And in between, neither he or Eugene went out of character. Of course, their dresses, the schmangies. And for like an hour and a half, where I'm talking to them off mic and as the schmangies, and I mean, I was like, moments away from wetting myself. It was one of the funniest experiences I've ever had in my entire life. Of course, none of it's on tape except for the 4 minutes that they used for the.
Yeah.
Still a classic, by the way. Still a classic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, you had an experience, Ted, that nobody else could have ever had.
Well, I was really lucky. It's and so much of it in life is timing, and it just turned out that way. Right?
Had you ever talked to Eugene Levy like years later? And even after John's
I got
passing?
to know. I got to know Eugene quite well. Actually, Eugene and I used to play golf all the time, and he'd come and play in my golf tournament, and we did a number of things together. I think that's where you and I first met, Brett. Was when you were working with John Brunton, who ran Insight Productions, and he did a thing.
Yeah, we did a promotion for Labatt Crystal Beer across Canada called the Crystal Comedy Quest. Yeah. So we'd pick winners from across Canada, fly them to Toronto. The culmination of that was an hour special on Global called the Crystal Comedy Quest, hosted by Bobby Bittman and Eugene's character, Bobby Bittman. And that's how because Ted would come. That's how I met Ted. I worked with John on it, and I told Ted, I got a picture. I can't find it, but I'll find it of me, you, and Eugene, and he's in character. It's a great picture.
There's another great guy, and John and Eugene, of course, were like the closest of friends. They were like brothers. They're very, very, very tight. No question. You see John's son and daughter, don't you, occasionally?
I do. I see Christopher Candy and Jennifer Candy. They both live here in LA. Both work in LA. So I see Christopher more than Jennifer, but we try to get together, he just lives down the street from my office. So we try to get together once every other month for coffee and get caught up on what Mom's doing, what Jen's doing, and what he's doing. Both, by the way, as you can imagine, wonderful, wonderful human beings, cut from the same cloth as John. In their sense of humor, and so they're both actors, and they do great. They're doing very, very well.
Do you tell them a lot of stories about John? The stories that you know?
Yeah, I do, because they were quite young, and I was with John for 3.5, 4 years, traveling, doing all the crazy stuff. So I do. When I'm with them, they'll want to hear some stories. I'll tell them. I repeat often, but I understand their position, that they don't have the experience that I had. That's their dad. Yeah. He was my boss and buddy. So we adventured a lot.
Is it true, Brett, that John had planned on sometime down the road on purchasing the Argos on his own? That McNall and Gretzky were going to bail, and he was going to buy the team on his own?
That's correct. That was one of the last things we talked about, unfortunately, before he passed. He was, Bruce and Wayne were getting out. John said to the group that was buying it, which was a kind of an offshoot of at the time, Blue Jays, the Dome, and they were going to purchase it because they wanted to consolidate everything to sell the whole package. Mm-hmm. Which they didn't do, but that was the goal. John wanted to hang in. He was having conversations with that group, and that was the plan, but it didn't come into fruition.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market, or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
Welcome back. This is a special edition of the Ted Wallachin podcast featuring Remembering with Jeff Sammut. It is his podcast where he looks back and recalls individuals or times in history of import. And this week he invited myself and Bret Gallagher to join him and chat about the late, great John Candy.
Would you both remember your last conversation with John?
I do, because I was working for him. And interesting enough, the last conversation I had with him, he was in Durango, Mexico. He had another week left to shoot on Wagons East. And our plan was to meet in Florida. Just grab your golf clubs. Let's meet in Florida. Let's go off the grid for a couple of weeks, because he's, a grueling shoot for him. And, that was the plan. That was probably, John was a great gift giver. John kept florists, and John was a big gift giver of, they have a thing here, probably have it live in Canada too, Fruit of the Month Club.
Yeah.
So if you had that list, all of a sudden a box of apples shows up. Hey, have fun. Green apples, John Candy. So John would do that to almost everybody you met. And so my birthday is March 2nd. John passed on the 4th of March. And I remember at home in Toronto, I got this massive box, like a crate full of fruit, and happy birthday, John. Right. And then, then we talked after that, then that was it. But he was a great gift giver. He loved giving gifts.
Ted, do you remember the last time you spoke?
I don't recall the last. I'll tell you. I have to think. I was at the Eastern Final game in the Argo box at Sky Dome back then, and I guess that would have been the last time that I saw him. And did John pass the following March?
That's correct.
Okay, so then the last time I would have seen him would have been November prior to his passing. And then I remember walking into the radio station one day and somebody saying CNN is reporting that John Candy died, and I went, "What?" Because he was like 43 at the time.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think like, no.
So you would have had to go on the air and talk about it.
I wasn't working on the air at the time. I was doing some other stuff, so I
Okay.
would not. I did eventually go on the air because I was asked by one of the announcers to come on and talk about it, and it was not a fun time.
No, I would imagine not. How would you have heard the
This
news?
has been a fun time. It's been, time passes, and you look back at the great things, and back then it was just too shocking.
Yeah, time helps, of course, with that sort of thing. Bret, what about you? Do you remember hearing the news?
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, I was at Ted remembers this place, Kit Kat restaurant.
Yeah,
Kit Kat on King Street. That was our hang.
Is it still there? Might still be there.
Al Carbone's place. No, Al Carbone. That was our spot. Yeah. So long story short, I was in the restaurant. It was like 12 o'clock. Phone's ringing. All of a sudden, I see a guy walk over to me and he goes, "It's for you." I'm in a restaurant. Phone's for you.
Mhm.
What? And it was my wife, Cindy, who got a call from John's office in LA looking for me. They told her the news. She called me. I didn't believe it. Hoax, blah, 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 blah. Hang up. Excuse myself, walk outside. Then I called the LA office looking for Bob Crane. Ted, Bob works with me and John for a long time.
Yeah.
And he usually answered the phone. He didn't answer it. Someone else answered it. And then I knew. That was it. And that was it.
Mm. Did he
Flew to
not,
LA that night and buried him.
did Bob Crane not answer the phone because he just wouldn't have been able to talk about it, or?
Well, he was in the office. No, what was happening is that they, when that happens, John had, crack security team basically came to the office, and then the machine kicks in, right? Because 1 million people were phoning the office.
Oh, I see.
Reporters, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I remember, not a great story, not the term, Eugene Levy, very close with John. My office at the time was at Second City, the old fire hall. That's where I had my office there. Because we either finished working on with Western International, Ted, I can't remember, we finished working on the application for the Comedy Channel,
Right.
which we were applying for. Anyway, I'm walking back I go back to the fire hall to go to the office to get some stuff. CTV, CBC, trucks pulling fire hall, right? Reporters jumping out. And I walked in, closed the door. I see Eugene walk down the street. Same thing. So poor Eugene, somebody wanted a statement, talk. Who's going to do it? We had to send Eugene out to do it. We just lost one of his best friends. We've got to go out and talk about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a heck of a time.
Did you ever worry about, because John's father passed away from complications of heart disease, 35 years old, 1955, and John would have only been 5 at the time. Was there ever an unspoken worry of John's health?
Again, not a doctor, not look at me.
No, but I mean, like,
and I had a brother, Ted knows, my brother passed away, similar heart attack.
Many
at a
people
young
knew
age.
your brother, Dan Gallagher.
Dan
He was a beloved man.
Oh, Dan was lovely.
He was very much. He could have been John Candy's brother.
Yeah, I worked with Dan briefly at 1010. I think he did a weekly show or something, but we did something together then.
They would get together on occasion, and Dan would come with us and hang, and it was the greatest thing to see those two guys go at it. It was the best.
Yeah.
John cast the only film made for TV movie that John Candy directed, called Hostage for a Day with George Wendt and Rhea Perlman, filmed that in Toronto. John gave Dan a role similar to what you were talking about. He just loved Dan so much. Dan's perfect for this kind of zany role that he did, and Dan absolutely loved it. They were great together. John Candy, first time John got interviewed, when he bought, how I met John, really met him, was when Candy Gressman all bought the Argos. They were coming to town, press conference. Someone told John he's got to get to Much Music for an interview, right? Dan was off that day. He was up in this place in Collingwood, and someone said the only guy that Dan's going to talk to, that John will talk to, is Dan Gallagher. So I get a call. I wasn't even working for them then. Can you call your brother and ask him to come down here and talk to John Candy? I said, sure. So Dan drives down from Collingwood. They set him up. I go to the Four Seasons to pick John up. We pull up. Dan walks out of Much Music. John gets out. John looks at Dan. Hey, Dan Gallagher. John looks at me. I didn't tell him it was my brother. Didn't come out. John looks at me. Goes, "What are you guys doing? What's going on here?" I had to explain to John, and that was it. We all became buddies.
That's funny.
But no, back to your question. I wasn't in a position to judge that, comment on that. On John's health. It wasn't, back then I didn't know. We're all just trying to survive and get by.
Sure.
So I didn't know.
Yeah. Ted, like there wasn't any talk of like, well, like you say, he's a big dude, maybe smoking cigars, whatever, and you go, it's not like today. I mean, I think we're more health conscious today than we were back in like the mid 90s, but was there ever any talk, any worry?
Not that I know, but you're right on two fronts. Nowadays, we're probably more health conscious. And also, remember, back then, he was 43 years old.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, right.
Kid.
People didn't die at that age, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, right?
Yeah.
That was not a common thing at all. And he was always in such a good mood, and he never looked ill.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, physically, he wasn't about to run up 3 flights of stairs, but he always seemed to be in good health.
Yeah, yeah, and he
never complained,
and he wouldn't give you cause for worry. Yeah,
and work ethic. His work ethic was unbelievable. I remember hearing stories about when he being on sets. John Hughes, as you guys all know who he is. Him and John were super tight.
Yeah.
Worked. They were it. I remember one of the first times I had to travel with John. We went to Chicago for a weekend, and I brought my wife with me. We stayed in downtown Chicago for 4 days. John went to John Hughes's house for 4 days, just him and John Hughes, because it was a creative session, spitballing ideas, future opportunities. 4 days. That's how much John Hughes loved John. Mm-hmm. But John Hughes would say about John Candy, John never rehearsed. He would never rehearse. You show John, here's the sides, hit it, boom, done. Like, wow. And so he would show up. He could be out till 4 a.m. He'd never miss a 7 o'clock call. So, and he's ready.
Yeah.
In character, ready to go. There's a great story that's been told many times, but I'll tell it again about when John was working with Maureen O'Hara on, not Harry Crumb, one of the romantic lead roles he had, mm-hmm. Based in Chicago, and Maureen O'Hara, the great Maureen O'Hara, was playing his mother. So they show up on set. John's got the fifth wheel. Ali Sheedy, fifth wheel, one of the producers, fifth wheel. John walks by and he sees like what they call it, Ted, the honey wagon. They have 4 little dressing rooms for the next level of stars.
Yeah.
John says, I want to go say hello to Miss O'Hara, play my mother. Where is she? Oh, she's in the honey wagon. He said, excuse me? John pulls the producers in. He says, he goes, follow me. John goes into his trailer, starts packing shit up. What are you doing? I'm going to go to the honey wagon, and you tell Miss O'Hara this is her dressing room. She acted with the Duke, John Ford.
Yeah.
So it's okay, guys. Well, we budget, and it's okay. No problem. Take mine. It's all for her. I'll go over here. Calm down. Half hour later, boom, big fifth wheel pulls up. Yeah, John. Okay, that's better. That's better.
Yeah.
That's the way he was.
That sounds like John Candy in a nutshell. I'm so glad we got to get together and remember John Candy as we did Bret Gallagher, Ted Wallachin. Thank you both for remembering John Candy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Candy, what a wonderful man. I wish I'd gotten to meet him at some point to speak with him. Wow. Bret Gallagher, Ted Wallachin, thank you both for joining us. To our musical director, Shannon Dukes, and to you for listening. Please hit subscribe and check out rememberingpodcast.com. We'll see you next time.
That'll do it again, as I mentioned, for this week. We invite you to join us every week and drop by our website, tedwallachin.ca, www.tedwallachin, WOLOSHYN.ca, and check out podcasts from the past. And while you're online, don't forget to fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. and Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by Becky Coles. That's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.